سخنرانی دکتر طارق الهاشمی، نایب رئیس جمهور عراق. وضعیت در عراق، دیکتاتوری، بحرانها و مداخلات رژیم ایران. کنفرانس در بروکسل به ریاست استرون استیونسون، رئیس هیئت رابطه با عراق در پارلمان اروپا، 16 اکتبر 2013، 24 مهر 92. سخنرانی‌های نخست وزیر سید احمد غزالی، لورد مگینس، استاندار ایو بونه، پاولو کازاکا، طاهر بومدرا، پروفسور ریمون تنتر و سرهنگ وسلی مارتین.
تلویزیون التغییر گزارش داد دکتر طارق الهاشمی، نایب رئیس جمهور عراق، در بروکسل با برنارد کوشنر، وزیر خارجه پیشین فرانسه، دیدار کرد. وی در این دیدار بر توقف دخالت‌های رژیم ایران در عراق و پایان دادن به قتل و آواره کردن مردم عراق تاکید کرد. به گزارش تلویزیون بغداد، دکتر طارق الهاشمی طی سخنانی که در بروکسل مقر پارلمان اروپا ایراد کرد، درباره پرونده نقض حقوق بشر در عراق و پرونده‌های سیاسی و امنیتی صحبت کرد. وی گفت جنایتکاران در تمامی استان‌های عراق دست به انفجار می‌زنند، در حالی که بسیاری از بیگناهان در بازداشتگاه‌ها زندانی هستند. تلویزیون الرافدین گزارش داد دکتر طارق الهاشمی در جلسه‌ای در بروکسل، مقر اتحادیه اروپا، در رابطه با مهمترین چالش‌ها در عراق و به ویژه درباره نقض حقوق بشر و موج اعدام‌ها و انفجارها سخنرانی کرد. سلمان الجمیلی، رئیس فراکسیون العراقیه در پارلمان عراق، به تلویزیون الحره گفت فراکسیون او همچنان طارق الهاشمی را نایب رئیس جمهور به شمار می‌آورد و احکامی را که بر اساس اعتراف‌های ساختگی و تحت فشار و شکنجه علیه او صادر شده است به رسمیت نمی‌شناسد. صوت العراق گزارش داد دکتر طارق الهاشمی، نایب رئیس جمهور عراق، در کنفرانسی در بروکسل با حضور شخصیت‌های سیاسی و پارلمانی گزارش مفصلی را از مشکلات هزاران عراقی بیگناه که برای سالیان طولانی در بازداشت بودند ارائه داد. طارق الهاشمی همچنین در یک کنفرانس مطبوعاتی اسناد و کلیپ‌های ویدئویی را به نمایش گذاشت که دست داشتن مالکی و دفترش در شکنجه و نقض خطرناک حقوق بشر را به اثبات می‌رساند و اینکه چگونه طارق الهاشمی اولین کسی بود که در دوره اولی که نایب رئیس جمهور بود در سال 2006 تا 2010 در یک دیدار تاریخی از زندان تصفیرات در رصافه و اداره اصلاح وارد زندانها شد. امری که مالکی را شدیداً خشمگین کرد تا آنجا که بعداً به جعل پرونده برای هدف قرار دادن او و تلاش برای کنار گذاشتن او از روند سیاسی پرداخت. در ادامه گزارش صوت العراق آمده است آقای طارق الهاشمی مورد توجه و استقبال زیادی قرار گرفت، چرا که اولین مسئول عراقی دارای یک منصب بالاست که مهمترین تجاوزات نوری المالکی و ارگانهای امنیتیش به حقوق مردم عراق را افشا کرد. و در اینجاست که نقش آقای طارق الهاشمی که با رأی صدها هزار نفر از رأی دهندگانی که از تلاش‌هایش حمایت می‌کنند به قدرت رسید و هنوز هم در بطن روند سیاسی قرار دارد بارز می‌شود. روند سیاسی که مردم عراق قیمت زیادی برای شفافیت و روشن کردن واقعیت‌های آن پرداخته‌اند.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my very great privilege this evening to welcome to Brussels the Vice President of Iraq, Tariq al-Hashimi, His Excellency Mr. Al-Hashimi is one of the most renowned politicians in Iraq, known for his principles of democracy and freedom, known for his work to bring freedom to the beleaguered population of that country. It was his brother who was murdered by the Iranians, and that has made Mr. Al-Hashimi always extremely frustrated at the growing influence of Iran inside Iraq. He became a fierce critic of Iranian meddling in his country. And that, together with the fact that he was the leading Sunni politician in the Iraqi government of senior politicians, led to the disgraceful situation which arose in December 2011, when 13 of His Excellency's bodyguards were arrested. One of them, aged only 33, was murdered under the torture imposed upon him by Nouri al-Maliki's thugs. Human Rights Watch said that when his body was returned to his family, they could not even recognize their son. Such had been the cruelty of his torture. But based on the evidence that he had been forced to give under torture, false evidence procured under torture, all 12 of the remaining bodyguards of His Excellency Tariq al-Hashimi were sentenced to death last November and are now on death row awaiting execution. This is the appalling injustice that has occurred to one of the leading Democrats who espouses all that we value in Europe as core democratic principles for freedom, democracy, human rights. This is the outrage that has happened in that country, where in the past 7 months there have been over 5,000 deaths from bombings, terrorist attacks, assassinations, where the country is spiraling again towards civil war, where unemployment is rocketing, where there is still only 4 hours of electricity a day, where many of the citizens don't have access to fresh running water, where the sewage systems, basic infrastructure of the country has completely broken down. And yet, the oil wealth, which has been restored to Saddam Hussein levels, the billions of dollars pouring into that country every day, has simply disappeared, stolen from the citizens of Iraq, and being used in corrupt ways by the Prime Minister and his government. This is an outrage to everything we stand for, all the values that we stand for in Europe and in the West. And it is time that this disgraceful situation was exposed. That's why it was important to invite His Excellency Tariq al-Hashimi to come here this evening at considerable personal risk. This is a courageous person of the highest order, and that's why I'm so delighted to give the floor to the Vice President of Iraq this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my dear Mr. Stevenson. I think his brief analysis of the current situation in Iraq could substitute my lengthy speech on Iraq. But I am really admired and very much encouraged that European Union, European Parliament, in the capacity of the Foreign Affairs Committee, in the capacity of Mr. Stevenson and others, keeping eyes open on the disastrous situation in my country. And hopefully this is going to pave the way towards assisting Iraqi people to get rid of a new form of dictatorship and to restore my country, putting it into the right course of building real democracy. Honorable guests, thank you very much for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first express my sincere thanks for you all, for the concern about the situation in my country. Inviting me to speak to you proves your objectivity, to seek evidence and listen to all parties involved in the crisis, and not only listen to the official view of the government, which firmly holds power and media in Iraq. I am here today to tell you about what's really going on in my country. I want to share with you some of the horrible facts that you cannot find in your daily newspapers or media channels. It is no secret anymore that Iraq is now held hostage by the current Prime Minister and its ruling party. Our experience with this government has dashed all hopes that Iraq will become a fully functioning democracy based on the rule of law. As you all well know, that terrorism exists in many parts of the world. Why it is increasing in Iraq, despite of huge allocated budget for the security? Terrorism expands where there are feeding elements like poverty, corruption, injustice, and sectarian discrimination. I will show you how al-Maliki helps the spread of terrorism in my country. I am not exaggerating if I say that Iraq has never witnessed in its modern history a government as worse as the current one. After 8 years under the government of Nur al-Maliki, Iraq has been deteriorating in public services, social justice, transitional democracy, development, judiciary, national peace, security, and last but not least, foreign policy. Al-Maliki has not only become a threat to the future of Iraq, but also a danger to the unity of the country and stability in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, because of the tight limit, I will be very brief, and I will be pleased to provide you with detailed information afterwards or answer any question in your mind. I can only mention now some issues about human rights, security, governance, and foreign policy. Starting with the human rights, I am sure that you have been following up and expressed your concern for the news and reports about the human rights situation in Iraq, which were issued by international organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. The actual situation much worse, as reports are short in covering unreachable secret prison and detention centers in the green zone or military camps. Just a few days ago, the government executed 42 people on terrorism charges. The astonishing thing here is that some of the inmates have already been found not guilty, but judicial authorities and were waiting to be released. Their families were expecting their arrival in their homes any moment, but they unfortunately got only their dead bodies. And I have copies of this tragedy. Does this help and end terrorism in my country? This government executed so far 132 people this year and 129 last year. Iraq Ministry of Justice confirmed that there are thousands queuing up for executions. Thousands of Iraq people. Can you explain to me why all these death penalties are against one sect or ethnic group? Why we did not hear of any executions of members of the Shia, death squad, and militias, simply because they are from the same sect of the Prime Minister? We have to admit of the fact that there is an ethnic and religious cleansing in my country. I am not only the one who claims this fact. United Nations Human Rights Chief Navy Pillay has recently harshly criticized Iraq's criminal justice system and accused Iraqi authorities of numerous convictions based on confessions obtained under torture and ill treatment, a weak judiciary and trial proceedings that fall short of international standards. More than 100 of my office staff are still under detention and being tortured. Some of them already died of torture. Several others have been sentenced to death. Their families are being blackmailed by security officers to release their sons in return of paying tens of thousands of dollars. Although all the international organizations condemned these mock trials and called for halting these biased proceedings, the government authorities seem indifferent and are so determined to execute them soon. We need the support of the international community to stop this disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, my case is politically motivated and charges are absolutely fabricated. Regardless, I express my readiness to return to Iraq, to Baghdad, and face all the charges against me and my staff. In case Europe guarantee a fair trial, I am confident of my bodyguards' innocence, and these accusations are totally fabricated. For the record, as Mr. Stevenson mentioned, in 2006, I lost my 3 siblings, 2 brothers and 1 sister, in separate terrorist assassinations. It's not a car bomb, being killed specifically and individually in 2006. 3 of them in 6 months in 2006. And I am in my capacity as a vice president. I didn't ask for a revenge. And even when Noor al-Maliki government failed to arrest the assassinators, the killers, I didn't ask them why. I just kept silence. This is the way that I have behaved. How come I now accused of terrorism act? I was the first high-ranking official to break the locks of the secret prison in 2008. And uncovered the various types of tortures against innocent people. Yes, what I am facing now is only a consequence and a fulfillment of a government's threat to me. A few years ago, to stop me from doing my duty in advocating human rights and supporting justice in the country. On the other hand, the freedom of speech has become a critical issue in Iraq. Hundreds of journalists have not been only the targets of terrorist groups, but also the government's terrorism. Al-Baghdadi TV channel has recently been forced to shut down, and the government confiscated all its equipment just because the channel was successfully in exposing all government corruption files to the public. The second part of my speech, security. As for the security, it has been increasingly deteriorating during the last 2 years in the country, especially in the capital. Baghdad, United Nations reports said more than 5,000 died and tens of thousands injured in violent attack this year. And when we want to investigate the responsibility for such horrible security collapse, the Prime Minister says that he cannot be held accountable. Although he is, in addition to his position as a Prime Minister, he is acting as a Commander-in-Chief, acting Minister of Defense, acting Minister of Interior, acting Minister of Security, National Security, acting the head of intelligence, all in one packet. And he is exclusively running the security file, not allowing, because there is no power sharing, not allowing anybody to take part or to share or to give an advice or criticize the management and the administration of the security file. Security situation is declining, although security forces are constantly growing and reached more than 1.5 million individuals. Moreover, the annual security budget takes more than 25% of the annual budget, which is usually higher than 100 billion US dollar. 5 days ago, in a TV interview, the Prime Minister announced that his 20-year-old son took armed forces and raided the residence of a businessman in the green zone because he embezzled 100 million US dollar and has hundreds of silencers guns in his house and illegally occupies tens of properties in the capital. Till now, we don't know. We do not know what official title his son has in the country to have such kind of power. I should admit that the government security forces were successful, but in one mission. In attacking Camp Ashraf, in curbing the peaceful protesters against the government. The well-known and latest example is in Hawija city in Kirkuk on April the 23rd of 2013, killing and injuring hundreds of demonstrators. The third part of my speech, governance and corruption. As for governance and corruption, I need long hours to cover part of this file. Local and foreign investors and businessmen usually say that the main obstacle to come to Iraq is the poor government effectiveness, married by corruption and political interference. They consider poor governance more dangerous than security. Since April 2003, Iraq spent more than $630 billion in addition to more than $30 billion from donors countries, while 30% of the population still live under poverty line. Millions still spend their nights in full darkness because of power cut. Thousands of pupils study on the floor in mud-made schools. Millions have no access to drinkable water in most provinces. Iraq now ranks number 175 of the most corrupted countries in the 182 countries surveyed. As indicated by Transparency International, for fifth year, Baghdad is considered the dangerous and the worst place in the world to live in. UNDP recent report says that an average Iraqi must pay at least 4 bribes per year. You must have heard of the corruption scandals by senior aides to the Prime Minister. The former Minister of Trade, Mr. Falah al-Sudani, who is a senior member of the Prime Minister political party, was officially accused and convicted of corruption. He is now free and living peacefully in London. The Minister of the Interior refused to ask the Interpol to arrest him. The corruption of this government caused also the death of thousands of Iraqis, as in the big scandal of purchasing technically proved ineffective bomb detection devices from a company in UK. Iraq bought a device with 40,000. Please see the figure. Iraqi government paid per each device $40,000, whereby the cost of that device is not exceeding $20, and being sold to third countries by $70. Al-Maliki government paid $40,000. The manufacturer in the prison in UK, given 10 years in a prison, 10 years, whereby the corrupted people in my country free. And the problem, this disastrous device is still used in the checkpoints. allowing the car bombs to go through without any problem, killing my innocent people. Just imagine the tragedy, please. Just imagine the tragedy. As for the country's sovereignty, needless to say, Iraq has completely fallen under the grip of Iran. A clear-cut example of this in the way the Iraqi government deals with the unarmed, legally behaved Iranian exile dissidents, Mujahidi Khalq. Who are supposed to be protected by the international law. They were under several attacks by the Iraqi security forces, killing hundreds and injured likewise figure, and this happened in violation of international law. My country, Iraq, has no interest to attack Camp Ashraf, has no interest to kill innocent people. What happened is just to serve and to entertain an Iranian agenda. That's it. The reputation of my country being damaged. I really feel sympathetic to the tragedy of those people and to the organization. But also, I feel very concerned about the reputation of my country. Those people are a guest in my country, being covered by international law. They should be protected, not being killed by Noor al-Maliki. Another example of Iranian influence and control of Iraq is the latter's decision to open its skies, civil aviation, to supply weaponry, ammunition, hostile equipment to the Syrian dictatorship regime, to further oppress its people. Iraq has become an air corridor and the main route for the Iranian military aid to Assad's government. It is necessary to mention here that the Iraqi government obey Iran, not because of Iran's political or military power. It's simply because of the religious ties and obligations. Officials of this government, headed by the Prime Minister, believe that it is their religious duty to follow the instructions of the Iranian Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Ladies and gentlemen, violence and terrorism in my country are by and large Iraqi-made and not imported from outside the country. They are the result of injustice, sectarian discrimination, arrogant and failing policies of the current Prime Minister. He is lying when he alleged that the uprising against the dictatorship in Syria fuels violence in Iraq. His view is purely sectarian and politically motivated. All army leaders say that they have full control of the Iraqi-Syrian border. Today, I am here to invoke you in the names of principles and values you believe in. The principle the principles of human rights, women's rights, democracy, good governance, transparency, rights of minorities, categorically asking you to protect these principles and values in my country. History will definitely write about your noble and brave effort to help the people of Iraq. We do not want our children to suffer what we have been through. To conclude, Iraq now is literally at critical crossroads, and al-Maliki policies are dragging my country into a sectarian civil war. I am appealing to you to interfere and help us before it's too late. The political process is at deadlock, and the democratic institutions are paralyzed. All national efforts to bring back confidence among the politicians have failed. Most politicians in Iraq now believe that an immediate action is needed by deep engagement from the international community. The best solution to end this crisis is by doing the following. One, the resignation of al-Maliki government. Second, forming a caretaker technocrat government. Three, holding a national conference, but under the umbrella of the international community, where all the Iraqi key political players meet to review at least at the last 10 years political process, identifying challenges and loopholes, and then agree on the joint roadmap for the reform and change in the country. I want also to ask those countries, especially the United States, which still blindly support the current Prime Minister, who keeps deceiving the international community by giving false reports about the situation in my country and never fulfill his promises. I ask them to reconsider their stance and help build a real and well-established democracy in Iraq. I know that the European Union is deeply engaged in its economic problems, but please, just to remind you that the entire world is indebted to Iraq because it was one day the cradle of civilization. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Shukran. Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm particularly proud to be invited here today and to share a platform with, there are many distinguished guests, but particularly, if I can mention but two, His Excellency Dr. Al-Hashimi. It's a pleasure to be on a platform with him. And the other person I want to mention is Tahar Bamidra. those two individuals, Dr. Hashimi, first of all, to think of his personal sacrifice, his own sacrifice, the fact that he has lost two brothers and a sister, hoods, is unbearable to think of. To look at and to be able to share this event with Tahar Bamidra, a man who at the height of his career representing the United Nations, who had the courage to step down and say, enough's enough, we're not... I am not going to endorse the deceit of people like Martin Kobler. And it's about that I want to speak. This evening. I want to speak, sadly, about the failure of my government, of the United States government, and of the United Nations. Each is either being conned or is turning a blind eye to the reality of what is happening in Iran and what is happening in Iraq. There are many. Let me just finally, in my acknowledgements, acknowledge that amongst the Iranian refugees here this evening, there are also many heroes, and I represent, if I may, a group of 500 parliamentarians in the United Kingdom who are deeply concerned. There are a tight little group of us who try to give direct support, but there are about 500 of our peers and members of Parliament who do support the PMOI and who want to see justice for those people. That Nouri al-Maliki, without the requirement of much persuasion, is influenced by the mullahs of Iran. We know that since 2009, the Iranian refugees in Iraq, who have been in Iraq for 25 years, now that they are disarmed, have been subjected to 5 outrageous attacks where many have been killed, about 100 altogether, at least 100, and where 52 people on the 1st of September were bound, handcuffed, and then callously shot down. That number of people callously shot by the authority and the orders of Nouri al-Maliki. Make no mistake, it was his SWAT team. It was no one else. It was his SWAT team acting under the persuasion, perhaps, of the mullahs who committed that awful atrocity. Even going in to make sure that people that they had fatally injured and who had been taken into to be cared for, that there was a bullet put in their heads as they lay helpless. And let's not forget that there are 7 other people who are hostage, 6 women and a man. We know that they're hostages. We know they're in Baghdad. We know that al-Maliki knows where they are. We know the Americans know where they are. I've reason to believe the United Nations know where they are. And we're simply not doing enough to secure their release. I find it very difficult. I contacted a very famous programme on the BBC. It's a late-night programme. I spoke to one of their presenters, with whom I've been friends for many years. He'd been out of the country and he hadn't even heard of the slaughter of 52 refugees. Let me ask this. What is wrong with our government? A minister in the government who has been helpful to me, Alistair Burt, he has tried to highlight the plight of the refugees in Camp Ashraf. And ladies and gentlemen, do you know that it's difficult to believe, but in the last change of government, he was removed as a Foreign Office minister, not to be given another portfolio. He was removed. What is going on? And I hope that people from the European Union who are here today will ask that question about my government and about your government and about all the so-called Western governments that should be concerned. If the governments were concerned, I believe the press would be. But my friend in that programme, he rang me up, he talked to me for half an hour, he did what he could, and the powers that be at the BBC would not carry a programme. I volunteered, obviously, to turn up and present what was happening. So that's what we're faced with. If we, and I know we do, if we support the Iranian refugees, if we want to see al-Maliki tagged and politically controlled, I don't believe it's possible, but if we want to move in that direction, then we have got to ensure that the press, the Western press, is a lot more assiduous than it has been to date in terms of the victims in Iraq and in Iran. In Iran, you probably know that this year alone there have been over 400. The good doctor, His Excellency, mentioned those who had been executed in Iraq. In Iran, there have been 470 executions this year, 231 of them from this very reasonable, very moderate, very promising, God help us, President Rouhani came into power. And I was listening, when I sat in my room today, I listened to the news. And our government is talking about the opportunity there's going to be. Well, Mr. Rouhani's no fool. He's been about for a long time. He's been involved in the persecution of his own people. But he does want the West to ease up on issues that cause economic difficulty for Iran. And it horrifies me that my Foreign Secretary, William Hague, and Kerry in America, and people like that, are suggesting that somehow we can do business. Those of us who believe in democracy, those of us who believe in freedom, we should make it very clear. We cannot and we will not do business with dictators who persecute their own people. It strikes me that for my government and the American government to ask Nouri al-Maliki to carry out an inquiry into the slaughter at Camp Ashraf is so ridiculous. It's like sending the fox into the hen house to count the chickens. Rouhani, to come back to just one point I wanted to make about Rouhani, he hasn't changed. Before he became president, I think there were about 60, 65 nuclear scientists engaged on developing nuclear energy, inverted commas. There are now 97 engaged, an increase of 50%, and he wants the West to believe, and the West does believe, apparently, that he's sincere. Before I sit down, can I say one thing? There are many things I'd like to say, but one thing I want to say is this: the hostages must be our priority in the short term. The reality is this, and I'm somebody with my background in Irish politics and having been one of the negotiators of the Belfast Agreement. The one thing I dread are hunger strikes. And we have some responsibility, the reaction to have a hunger strike that is spread amongst many of the Iranians is something that worries me. 47 days, I think it is. I would like to see governments making some sort of a tangible promise now, and I'd like to see, and I say this with all humility, I'd like to see those who are on hunger strike accepting, being able to accept a guarantee from our European Union countries that would enable them to come off. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, honoured guests, can I say we must encourage, however we do it, we must encourage action. Words at this moment, we've all been here, we've said it before, words are not enough. We've got to have action from our government. That means that if I've got to camp on the door of 10 Downing Street, I should be prepared to do it. So let's go out of here with new determination to get the press and to get our politicians single-mindedly pursuing what is a just and honourable course, and in His Excellency Dr. Hashimi and in Tahir we have wonderful examples. Thank you.
Je me sens d'abord honoré, Monsieur le Président, d'être à côté d'une personne qui n'est pas n'importe qui. Nous avons avec nous aujourd'hui le vice-président de la République irakienne. C'est un grand honneur d'être à ses côtés, mais d'entendre son discours, d'entendre les faits, ce qu'il nous a raconté, ce que malheureusement l'opinion occidentale ignore, la réalité irakienne. Je suis bouleversé. Je suis bouleversé bien que étant déjà au courant de ce qui se passe là-bas. Le frère طارق الهاشمی, je ne voudrais pas être vice-président de la République, aurait pu très bien. Il n'est pas ici pour défendre son cas personnel, parce que s'il devait défendre son cas personnel, il avait la position en Irak d'en profiter largement. Il n'aurait pas eu sa famille décimée, il serait à la tête d'une haute fortune et il serait comme malheureusement beaucoup de dirigeants au Maroc. C'est une très haute personnalité du monde politique en Irak et qui est caractérisée par un courage extraordinaire. Il a dit avec beaucoup de pudeur ce qui lui est arrivé à lui personnellement et qu'il était venu ici non pas pour défendre son cas personnel, mais pour alerter l'opinion sur quelque chose de très grave qui se passe dans cette région. L'Irak et l'Iran, et ce que vit le peuple irakien, ce que vit, la tragédie que vit personnellement Tariq el-Hashimi, montre combien ces deux peuples, le peuple iranien et le peuple irakien, souffrent. Et souffrent devant une certaine différence des grandes puissances et de l'Organisation des Nations Unies. Or, ces deux peuples, ce n'est pas uniquement le pétrole, c'est vrai, ils ont beaucoup de pétrole, ils ont beaucoup de gaz, mais ils ont aussi beaucoup de soleil, ils ont aussi beaucoup d'eau, ils ont aussi des terres, et ils ont surtout une histoire de plusieurs millénaires. Et donc ce qui peut se passer là-bas ne peut pas nous laisser indifférents. Parce que ce soit en bien ou en mal, nous en profiterions, nous, et nous en souffrions, nous aussi, pas seulement dans la région du Moyen-Orient. Et cette tragédie devrait être regardée aussi sous un autre angle. C'est que ce qui se passe actuellement en Irak, qui est le résultat de la guerre de 2003, a été finalement de mettre tout ce pays énorme entre les mains d'un régime, qui est le régime iranien. Et il y a ceci de paradoxal, c'est que la politique, notamment de l'administration américaine, conduit à des situations désastreuses. Deuxièmement, il y a là les positions courageuses que prend le président Tariq el-Hashimi. Ce n'est pas uniquement pour des questions simplement irakiennes, c'est aussi pour ce que commet ce gouvernement dont il nous a rappelé qu'il dit à la fois le chef du gouvernement, le chef, le ministre de l'Intérieur, le ministre de la Justice, le ministre de la Sécurité, le chef des forces armées. C'est ça la démocratie? C'est ça le régime démocratique? Eh bien, ce régime, il applique exactement la même férocité, la même cruauté vis-à-vis des citoyens irakiens comme de ceux qui sont leurs hôtes et leurs frères, que sont les habitants d'Ashraf. Le dernier des forfaits a été que l'armée irakienne, qui était censée défendre la sécurité, protéger ses citoyens, est rentrée et elle les a tués de sang-froid, directement, le pistolet, les mains attachées, et avec l'intention, c'est pas arrivé, de tuer tout le monde. Et ils sont repartis, effectivement, avec la conviction qu'ils ont tué tous les habitants d'Ashraf. Et c'est pour ça que, pour eux, il n'y avait que ces 7 survivants qu'ils ont pris comme otages. Donc, le sort du peuple iranien et le sort du peuple irakien sont liés. Et il ne peut pas, on ne peut pas espérer le moindre bien tant qu'à la tête de ces pays, il y a des régimes aussi dictatoriaux que le régime iranien et le régime irakien. Et c'est pour ça que c'est très sincèrement et de tout cœur, chers frères, Monsieur le Président, nous sommes ici réunis pour vous dire que nous sommes avec vous. Nous comprenons parfaitement, nous souffrons ce que vous souffrez vous-même, ce que souffre le peuple irakien, mais il faut que vous sachiez que devant cette conspiration du silence à travers le monde occidental, il y a aussi des milliers d'hommes politiques, et ils sont représentés ici, parmi les parlementaires européens, parmi les parlementaires d'une manière générale, qui, eux, connaissent la situation, que sont les amoureux de la démocratie, et ce sont vos meilleurs alliés, Monsieur le Président. Encore une fois, que Dieu vous préserve pour le bien de votre pays, et soyez assurés que nous sommes de tout cœur avec vous.
Merci beaucoup.